Talk to Ambassador John Bolton, former ambassador to the United Nations. He served in Trump's first administration. He's since been indicted. Didn't want to talk about that, understandably. He's under charges, and so he's going to talk about that with his lawyers. But he did talk about Trump, and he talked about these prospective wars that are out there, and his verdict is disturbing. It's a really interesting conversation with a guy who's been around the block with Donald Trump, and I hope you like it. And if you do, like and subscribe for us. It'll help. Every one of these newsmaker interviews is brought for you to help you understand a complicated world at this complicated time. So now, here's my interview with Ambassador John Bolton. Ambassador John Bolton, thanks very much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
Look, there's a lot to talk about, but the thing that is on my mind the most right now, frankly, I've been freaking out a little bit about it, is Venezuela and the administration's plans, such as they are, for what? When you look at American force posture now in the Caribbean, including special forces, that aircraft carrier group, the whole deal, and the rhetoric from the Trump administration, what do you think is going to happen? And from your perspective, what's in the national interest of the United States for us to do with Venezuela?
Well, I think the Trump administration is very confused. I think it's got a lot of objectives and motives that you see expressed at different times for different reasons, but no overall coherent plan. I mean, personally, I think there's a very strong U.S. national security interest in overthrowing the Maduro regime. It's propped up by the Russians, the Chinese, the Cubans. Iran is all over it. You know, probably Iran's largest embassy in the world is in Caracas, where they help coordinate Hezbollah activities in Latin America and launder their sanctioned oil revenues through Venezuelan banks. So we've got plenty of good reason to get a new regime in, one hopefully supported by the people. And from the perspective of the Venezuelan people, getting out from under Maduro is certainly a high priority. So in principle, I don't have any problem, as we tried to do in 2018 and 2019, support the opposition and get rid of the Maduro regime. I would say, having failed once, we owe it to ourselves to get it right this time, not to mention for the Venezuelan people. And I just see a mishmash of thinking that has already alerted Maduro and his external supporters that they may be at risk, and they have not been sitting just contemplating what might happen. I'm sure they've been taking steps that would make whatever we may do that much more difficult.
Well, before we get to whatever we may do, I'm going to push back on you. I know you've heard this a lot. When will we ever learn, John Bolton, that our ability to change governments around the world doesn't usually turn out very well? Ask the Vietnamese, ask the Iraqis, ask plenty of countries around the world, and ends up harming our country domestically in terms of the cost, in terms of the obviously the death and destruction. Is regime change never going to go out of style for the United States of America? And how do you answer people who say that when they see the wreckage from the Iraq War and all the rest of it, and they blame you? How do you answer them?
Well, I could take about an hour to explain why I disagree with the premise of your question and talk about the cases where regime change has been successful, or at least in the short term. But to take the specific example of Venezuela, because I think these are all fact-specific cases, back in 2018 and 2019, we were very closely aligned with the opposition. We agreed that we would engage in economic sanctions. We'd put as much pressure on Maduro as we could. Frankly, we didn't do as much as we could. We didn't enforce the sanctions. But that was consistent with what the opposition wanted. They didn't want military force. They thought, through internal pressure and a variety of other things, that this would all help to destabilize the regime. They tried it. It didn't work. It was a tragedy for everybody involved. I don't have any sense this time that the White House is closely aligned with the Venezuelan opposition. Obviously, they say, and they have to say, they support American opposition to Maduro, but are we really coordinated with them? Do they want the use of military force? They will be the ones who will have to pick up the pieces and govern if it succeeds, and they'll be the ones that bear the brunt of the repression if it fails. If I thought that's really where the Venezuelan people were, that would be very important. I don't have a sense that's done, and I think that's part of the general failure to get ready for this. So that's what makes me worried that we're about to try and do something that has a high risk of failure.
You know, I was talking to an acquaintance who has some connection to the talks inside the administration, and he says he's, like you, having a hard time figuring out what it is exactly the administration is doing, but he fears that it's a show of force, literally for the show of force. It's punchakami, and that'll be a flex in this hemisphere and around the world. Is that possible? That could be the reason we would, I don't know, open fire or support some kind of action against the government of Venezuela?
Well, I think if Trump's put himself in a box here, if he takes no military action, he's going to look foolish for having an entire carrier strike group sally forth from Europe, spend a couple weeks sailing around the Caribbean, and then go back without doing anything. But I think he looks worse if he launches some Tomahawk missiles, if he has special operators do some clandestine operations inside Venezuela, which I don't think Trump would appreciate much because he wouldn't be able to talk about them, although that probably wouldn't restrain him. But if we take steps like that, and Maduro's still in power when we're done, then I think we look more foolish. To me, this is what helps demonstrate that there has not been adequate planning here, and makes it all the more difficult to understand. As I say, given that we tried in Trump's first term, you'd think that this time the planning would be as comprehensive as you can make it before you act. I don't see evidence of that. For example, in the first term, we had very strong bipartisan support for our help to the opposition. Now that's just invisible. I don't see congressional support from the Democrats, and I see the MAGA Republican side of the House split as well. So he just hasn't laid the groundwork.
And the last question on this, it sounds there's no rhyme or reason that you can see, maybe reason, but no real rhyme to how we would go about taking action against the sovereign government of Venezuela, rotten though it may be. Are we going to war in our hemisphere against Venezuela?
I don't think Trump knows. I mean, I don't know either, that's for sure. I don't feel bad about that because I don't think Trump knows. I think that the condition of Venezuela is a tragedy for everybody involved. And if we, for example, another thing they're not doing that we did in the first term, gather the other nations of the hemisphere to support the Venezuelan opposition. In the first term, the Lima group under Peru's leadership had pretty much everybody else except Cuba and a few others lined up to help Juan Guaido, whom we considered the legitimate president. There's no comparable diplomatic work that's been done this time. So I just have a bad feeling about this, and I think overall it will reduce American credibility around the world if we try something and don't succeed here.
Well, that's on that happy note. I'd like to shift gears. The other thing this week, this peace plan for Ukraine, which feels like and sounds like it was written basically by the Kremlin, Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Switzerland in negotiations trying to get some buy-in from Ukraine, who feel obviously pressured to get something done. But to me, and tell me what you think of this, it feels like not only an abandonment of Ukraine. It's clear that from the start that Trump has taken Russia's side, but it's an abandonment in a real world sense of the transatlantic alliance, that essentially we don't care what Europe thinks. They see the danger from Russia. We don't care what Ukraine thinks. He doesn't like this. He wants out.
Well, I think this is one more effort by Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize. I know this is hard for many people to understand, that that's what motivates him, but it's not based on American national security interest. It's based on one last chance for Donald Trump to do what he said he could do in the campaign in 24 hours, which was a foolish statement to make then, obviously not borne out. It does look like this plan was written in Russian. In fact, over the weekend, Marco Rubio told a group of Republican and Democratic senators at a conference in Nova Scotia that it was written by the Russians. And by the end of the day, I think on Saturday, he had to reverse himself. So you have to ask, was Rubio in on the initial negotiation of this or not? So the takeaway here, I think, is as with Venezuela, the government, our government internally is in complete disarray, and it turns solely on Trump's moods and neuron flashes day by day, indeed hour by hour, and that speaks very poorly for the chance of anything positive coming out of this for Ukraine, for NATO, or for the United States.
Last question. You talked about Trump's personality. I'm looking at the United States military and the cleaning of house of senior officers throughout the Pentagon and in the field. And Secretary Hegseth, still Secretary of Defense under the law, Hegseth, do you feel that Trump is trying to make the U.S. military his personal instrument of this personalized, quasi-authoritarian power he seems to try to be amassing? Are you concerned about the 7 Days in May scenario, as if people know that old movie?
Yeah, well, I'm concerned about the negative effect it's having on the military for sure. We've tried for decades and decades to both ensure civilian control over the military and make sure the military isn't politicized. And what these generals and admirals are being fired for is obeying the lawful order that they got during the Biden administration. So that sets a precedent that any flag officer is going to worry about. That he may not agree with something. That's not the call of the flag officer. They're supposed to obey the orders if they're lawful and not be prejudiced when the next administration comes in that happens to want to do something different. I mean, it's a very destructive approach. I don't think it's part of a coherent plan because, as we've been discussing, Trump doesn't plan coherently. But the negative effect on our military is substantial. There's no doubt about that.
So do you think those members of Congress who came out, don't give up the ship, you have the right to refuse illegal, unlawful orders, do you think that was right for those members of Congress to do or not?
Well, I wouldn't have done it that way. I don't disagree with what they're saying. I think we've got a real problem with Congress on both sides of the aisle. People have forgotten how to legislate. If there's a problem of a president giving dangerous orders or taking dangerous steps with the military, how about Congress, which is entrusted by the Constitution with writing rules for the governance of the Army and the Navy, legislating and saying that we have a problem with Trump, here's what our fix is, and let's see what happens then. I think if Congress did more legislating and less social media activity, the country would be in a lot better shape.
I think you'd get agreement across the aisle for that. Ambassador John Bolton, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.